It was well past sunset, and most of the hospital had fallen into a hush. Nurses exchanged tired nods at the end of their shifts. Fluorescent lights flickered faintly in the hallways, and the usual buzz of daytime urgency had dwindled into the still rhythm of beeping monitors and distant footsteps. But on the pediatric floor of St. Helena Medical Center, one room was still full of quiet sobs. Room 312. Inside lay a 6-year-old boy named Liam, his face pale beneath the thin light of the bedside lamp. His wide eyes shimmered with fear, though his physical wounds were already treated. What hurt him now wasn't the scrape of injury. It was loneliness, fear, and the uncertainty of waking up in a hospital far from home. Liam had been in a car accident while traveling with his aunt to visit his grandparents. No parents nearby. No familiar faces. Just strangers in scrubs and machines that beeped. And while the doctors had done their job, patching him up and monitoring his vitals, Liam still flinched at every creak in the hallway, clutching the small, torn dinosaur plush toy he was found with. He hadn't spoken since arriving, and that's when Clara walked in. Nurse Clara Reyes had already worked a 12-hour shift. Her back ached, her legs felt like concrete, and the thought of finally collapsing on her couch with microwaved lasagna and her cat, Buttons, had nearly pulled her out the door. But something made her pause at the nurse's station. A note left in the system about Liam's condition, nonverbal, afraid, no guardians present. Something about that stirred a memory deep inside her. A small girl who once cried herself to sleep in a hospital bed too big, too cold, with only the quiet hum of machines for company. She had been that child once, and no one had stayed then. So Clara turned back, quietly, without clocking overtime, without telling anyone. She stepped softly into room 312, pulling up a chair beside Liam. At first, he didn't move. His fingers gripped the edges of his blanket, like it might float away. Clara didn't speak either. She knew silence was its own kind of comfort. She sat and gently placed a stuffed monkey, one she'd snagged from the donations shelf, next to his pillow. Then she just waited, humming softly, an old lullaby from her childhood in the Philippines. It was a song her mother had sung on stormy nights, when thunder shook the windows and Clara couldn't sleep. Liam shifted slightly. His eyes flicked toward her. "That's Mr. Bananas," Clara whispered, gesturing toward the monkey. "He's a great listener." For the first time, Liam's lips curled. Not quite a smile, but something softer than fear. That simple moment stretched into hours. Clara stayed, reading gently from an old copy of Where the Wild Things Err, she found on the ward's bookshelf. She let Liam hold her hand as he drifted in and out of sleep, and when he finally closed his eyes, with less tension in his small shoulders, she stayed a little longer, just in case the fear crept back. What Clara didn't know was that someone had been watching. Unbeknownst to her. At the far end of the corridor, seated quietly on a bench near the vending machine, was a man in a tailored charcoal, gray suit. His name was Jonathan Hale, a reclusive billionaire philanthropist known only to a select few. He had come to the hospital that evening, not as a wealthy investor or foundation head, but as a concerned grandfather. His granddaughter had undergone emergency surgery just one floor down, and while waiting for updates, he had wandered the pediatric unit in quiet reflection. His life had always revolved around power, acquisitions, mergers. But that night, everything had shifted. Watching his granddaughter's small fingers Clutch her mother's hand had reminded him of something he had long buried: humanity. And it was there, in that dimly lit hallway, that he saw Clara. He saw the nurse who had clearly finished her shift, hair falling from its bun, shoes worn down from hours of walking, sit down beside a frightened child without hesitation. No show, no performance, no audience, just kindness. Pure, unfiltered kindness. He watched her comfort a stranger's child like it was the most natural thing in the world. And something cracked inside him. Jonathan didn't interrupt. He didn't approach. He simply took mental note. Her name from the chart clipped to the end of the bed. The badge she wore. The way she smiled with her eyes, even through exhaustion. And he made a decision right then and there. The next day, Clara arrived early as always, hair pulled back neatly, uniform pressed. No one knew she'd stayed late the night before. She wasn't seeking credit. But when she checked on Liam, a surprise waited. He had spoken. Softly, barely audible, but he had said, "Mr. Bananas missed you." Her heart swelled. It was a small miracle, but to Clara, it was everything. What she didn't know yet was that her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. Across town, in a towering glass building, Jonathan Hale's assistant was already on the phone making inquiries. Background checks, personnel files, performance reviews. He wanted to know everything about Nurse Clara Reyes. Not to intrude, but to reward, to thank. Because what he had witnessed had reshaped something in him. And he was a man who never did anything halfway. But Clara continued her day as normal. She assisted with patient charts, made rounds, answered calls from panicked parents, administered meds, and handled emergencies with practiced grace. She skipped lunch to cover for a colleague and stayed 2 hours late, when a sudden influx of ER admissions overwhelmed the floor. Still, no complaint passed her lips. Later that evening, as she finally walked through her apartment door, Buttons meowed indignantly from his perch on the windowsill. Clara smiled tiredly, scooped him up, and flopped onto the couch. She didn't know that her email inbox now held a message from someone whose name she would barely recognize, offering her something she never dared dream of. And a letter, already en route, was on its way to the hospital's director. Clara thought she was just doing her job, but the ripples of her kindness had reached far beyond that sterile hospital room. Her simple decision to stay and comfort a scared little boy had been witnessed, and would now echo back to her in the form of something extraordinary. Clara Reyes arrived at St. Helena Medical Center early the next morning, sipping from a chipped thermos of instant coffee. Her sneakers were frayed, her scrubs the same shade of faded blue as always, and her smile, though modest, was genuine. She didn't come to work for applause or recognition. She came because she believed healing was more than medicine. It was presence. And for Clara, no one should ever feel alone, especially not in a hospital bed. When she reached the third-floor pediatric station, something felt off. Not wrong, but different. Colleagues whispered in hushed tones, glancing at her with curious eyes and veiled smiles. She brushed it off. Probably just gossip about someone's weekend or another shift change. She set down her thermos, clocked in, and picked up the daily assignment sheet. Then she noticed the envelope. It was sitting neatly on top of her clipboard. Cream, colored, thick paper, with her name handwritten in elegant calligraphy. Clara Reyes. No one she knew had handwriting like that. She hesitated for a second, then opened it. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality parchment, folded carefully, bearing an embossed seal at the top. The message was simple: Ms. Reyes, you don't know me, but I saw something in you that the world rarely notices: quiet compassion when no one was watching. What you did for Liam was not part of your shift, not on the clock, not even required, but you stayed. You comforted a child when no one else thought to. You reminded me of something I lost long ago. I would like to meet with you, not to offer charity, but to present an opportunity, one that could change your life, and through you, change the lives of countless others. A car will be waiting at the main entrance at 5 p.m. today. No obligation, just curiosity and conversation. Warmly, Jonathan hailed Clara. Blink. Her heart skipped once, then twice. She glanced around, suddenly hyper, aware of her surroundings. Was this a prank? But no one she knew would go to such lengths, and the name, Jonathan Hale, did ring a bell. She vaguely recalled it from charity newsletters the hospital occasionally received. A reclusive billionaire with a history of major philanthropic donations, especially in healthcare and education. Still, it didn't feel real. She slid the letter into her pocket and got to work. Liam was doing better. He smiled more, talked more. Even offered Clara half of his pudding cup at lunch, which she graciously declined. But the gesture made her heart swell. The boy had begun to heal, not just from injuries but from trauma. And maybe, just maybe, she had helped turn the tide. The day passed quickly, filled with the usual demands of a busy pediatric ward. IVs, emotional parents, emergency calls. But every time Clara passed a reflective surface, she caught herself wondering, why me? At 4:58 p.m., Clara stood outside the hospital entrance, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. She had nearly talked herself out of going at least 3 times. But curiosity won. A sleek black town car pulled to the curb. The driver stepped out, politely greeted her by name, and opened the back door. Clara climbed in, her heart racing. The ride was quiet, smooth, surreal. She expected maybe a downtown restaurant or an office, but instead, they drove up a long hill lined with trees to a gated estate overlooking the city. It was something out of a movie. Stone columns, manicured gardens, and a house that looked more like a palace. Jonathan Hale met her at the door himself. He was older than she expected, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair neatly combed back and eyes that carried a mix of sharp intelligence and something softer. Gratitude. He wore no tie, just a simple sweater and slacks, but everything about him radiated composure. "Ms. Reyes," he said, offering his hand. "Thank you for coming. Please, call me Jonathan." Clara shook his hand, still unsure what to say. He led her into a sitting room where tea and pastries waited. The windows overlooked a garden where birds flitted between branches. Clara felt like Alice having tea with the Mad Hatter. Except this Mad Hatter was calm, articulate, and had clearly done his homework. "I watched you that night," Jonathan began after they sat. "Not intentionally. I was waiting for news about my granddaughter. She's fine now, but I was unmoored. And I saw you sit with that boy. I saw you give him peace when no one else could. You didn't know anyone was watching. That's what struck me." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "It was nothing." "No," Jonathan said firmly, leaning forward. "That's where you're wrong. It was everything. That act of kindness. That instinct to stay, even when you were tired, unpaid, unacknowledged. That's what this world is missing. He paused. I've spent my life building empires. I've donated to hospitals, research, education, but writing checks is easy. Seeing real change, that's hard, until I saw you. He opened a folder on the table beside him and slid it toward her. Inside was a proposal. Clara glanced at the top line. Hail Compassionate Nursing Fellowship. Founding Director Clara Reyes. Her jaw dropped. I want to fund a program, he said. One built around your philosophy. Nurses who go beyond the charts and checklists. Training that emphasizes compassion, emotional intelligence, human connection. Scholarships, mentorship, a center for empathetic healthcare, and I want you to lead it. Clara's throat tightened. I'm just a nurse. Jonathan shook his head. No, you are the nurse, the one who changes lives. And if you accept this, we'll change more. It felt like a dream, not just the offer, though that alone was staggering, but the belief, the trust. No one had ever looked at her this way. She had always been the helper, the one behind the curtain. And now, someone was placing her center stage. Tears welled in her eyes. But I don't have degrees. I never finished my master's. I don't know how to run a foundation. Then we'll get you what you need, Jonathan said. Education, advisors, whatever it takes. I'll support you every step of the way. This isn't about resumes. It's about heart. You've got that in abundance. Clara sat in stunned silence, the weight of the offer sinking in. She thought of Liam, of the hundreds of patients she'd held the hands of the nights she stayed behind with no thanks. And suddenly, she realized this was her moment to multiply her impact. She nodded, tears streaking down her face. Yes, I'll do it. 1 year later, the Hale Center for Compassionate Care opened in partnership with St. Helena Medical Center. Clara stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, no longer just a nurse, but a leader. She had earned her master's degree, mentored dozens of young nurses, and helped reshape training programs across the state. The center featured trauma-informed care courses, empathy-based communication workshops, and family support initiatives, all inspired by the night Clara stayed with a frightened child. Liam and his parents attended the opening. He ran up to Clara and hugged her tightly. Mr. Bananas still sleeps next to me, he whispered. Jonathan Hale sat quietly in the front row, watching with a soft smile. He had given her resources, but she had given him something greater, faith that the world could still be kind. The ripple of that one act of compassion had become a wave, and it all started with a tired nurse who stayed.